Hi everyone, this video is on Jonathan Swift. Let's get a picture of him. There we go. He was born in Dublin in the year 1667. His parents had immigrated to Ireland sometime earlier. His family, they were royalists. They supported Charles I during this English Civil War a couple of decades earlier, and they came out on the losing end of that when Charles I was executed. And so the Jonathan Swift's father and his brothers, they immigrated to Ireland and pursued careers in law to try to rebuild after that. Swift's father actually died before he was born. In 1686, he graduates from Trinity College, Dublin, where he had been studying to prepare for an ecclesiastical career in the Church of Ireland. While studying for a master's degree in 1688, 1689, the Glorious Revolution takes place, and the Catholic king, James II, is deposed and replaced by his Protestant daughter, Mary II, and her husband, William of Orange. There were a lot of allies of James II, Catholic allies in Ireland, and so there was a war called the Williamite War between England and the Irish Catholics supporting James II. This conflict resulted in the closure of Trinity College, and Swift left and traveled to England, where he was hired as secretary of a family friend and statesman named Sir William Temple, whom you see pictured there on the right. And he stayed with Temple at his estate near London, and the estate was called Moor Park. Temple was, by this point, retired politician and spent most of his time in his garden. While there, living with him, he met Esther Johnson, who would later become Stella. She was 8 years old when they met, and he took an interest in her, and she apparently was receptive to him, and she was his pupil for many years, well into adulthood. Swift continued to instruct her and guide her education. After earning his master's degree, Swift returned to Ireland and was ordained as a priest in the Church of Ireland. He was appointed prebend of a rural diocese. He was very unhappy there. It was very, very rustic, very isolated, not what he was used to living close to London. He had fallen in love with a woman named Jane Waring, who was the sister of a college friend of his. But that relationship fell apart for some reason. She rejected his marriage proposal, and he left Ireland and went back to Moor Park. I'm sure that this failed relationship was pretty formative for Swift. So back at Moor Park in the late 1790s, he's assisting William Temple with his papers and memoirs, and editing them and seeing them through to publication. Also during this period, he composes his first great prose satires, The Battle of the Books and Tale of a Tub. They would be published in 1704. After Temple's death in 1699, he returns to Ireland, where he is instituted Vicar of Laracor. He's awarded a Doctor of Divinity from Trinity College in early 1702. He travels to England and back again, but this time when he returns to Ireland, he brings Esther Johnson, who's now 20 years old, with him. This has created a lot of speculation about their relationship. Was it platonic? Was it conjugal? There's a lot of disagreement about this. Recently discovered documents suggest that they may have been secretly married in 1716, but we have no definitive proof of this. And even if they were married, they did not live like a married couple. From 1708 to 1710, he becomes a more professional writer. He publishes a series of papers called the Bickerstaff Papers, quite popular. More importantly, I think, is the friendship that he forms with Addison and Steele, the magazine publishers. They will wind up publishing some of his first poems. And he also assumes editorship of a Tory newspaper, The Examiner. The Tory political party was the same party that the party of Gay and John Gay and Alexander Pope and John Arbuthnot. And so he fell in with those guys and formed the Scriblerus Club. And he would maintain those friendships until they died. In 1713, he was appointed Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, and following the death of Queen Anne and the ascension of George I in 1714, Swift returned to Ireland, this time followed by another woman named Esther Van Hamri, or he called her Vanessa, whom he had met in London in 1707. Apparently, this was quite flirtatious relationship, and it led to some tension with Esther Johnson. There's a lot of mystery surrounding Swift's relationships with these different women, Jane Waring and Esther Johnson and Esther Van Hamri. In 1720, he begins publishing anonymously publishing popular prose satires supporting Irish causes, Irish autonomy. Proposal for the universal use of Irish manufacturers, one in 1720. Another series of letters quite controversial, the Drapier's Letters from 1724 to 25. Controversial because they involved the monetary system, the Irish monetary system, and got Swift's publisher into a good deal of trouble. And then the most famous of his satires on this subject would be The Modest Proposal that appeared in 1729. Famous because he proposes that the solution to poverty, Irish poverty, is for the wealthy to eat the children of the poor and to make gloves and boots and things out of their skins. These prose satires were quite famous and led to Swift being venerated by the Irish even to this day as someone who was at the forefront of the Irish cause. And his publications resulted in a number of failed attempts to censor and prosecute him and his publisher, Edward Waters. In 1726, he returned to London and published the work for which he's most famous. That would be Gulliver's Travels, although as you can see looking at the title page there, it was originally titled Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World by, he's using the pseudonym there, Lemuel Gulliver. It's in 2 volumes, 4 books in 2 volumes. In 1727, while staying with Pope at Twickenham, he learns that Esther Johnson is very sick, and he travels back to Dublin to attend to her. She recovers, and he returns to England, but then she dies in early 1728. And obviously, he cared very deeply about this woman, had for decades, and I'm sure that this was a significant and tragic moment in his life. In 1738, his health began to decline, and he began to suffer from some form of dementia. He had a stroke in 1742, and he never spoke again after that. And actually, Samuel Johnson mentions these sad last years of Swift in the poem "The Vanity of Human Wishes." I think line 318, he mentions Swift by name. Swift died in 1745. Like I said earlier, he was the last member of the original Scriblerus Club to go. He was 78 years old, and this was about a year and a half after Pope's death. And then he was buried in St. Patrick's Cathedral, as you can see in the picture there on the right. He was buried next to Stella. You can see her plaque on the right there, Esther Johnson, and then in parentheses, Stella. And then on the left is Swift's plaque, right on the floor, St. Patrick's. So the poems that we're looking at can be divided into three groups. The first group is a description of the morning and a description of a city shower. These were published in Richard Steele's Tatler magazine in 1709 and 1710, respectively. These are early examples of the town eclogue genre, which we've seen before when we read Lady Mary Wortley Montagu. And Swift's friend and fellow scribbler John Gay also wrote town eclogues. And you can go back and look at the Lady Mary Wortley Montagu video for more on this genre, which goes back to the Latin poet Virgil, and his pastoral poems. In fact, City Shower alludes directly to Virgil's description of a storm in Georgics. The second group of poems would be the birthday poems. These are verse epistles or letters written to a specific person. In this case, they're written to Esther Johnson, whom he calls Stella. And he got that name from Sir Philip Sidney's Renaissance sonnet sequence, Astrophil and Stella. These poems started on her 38th birthday in 1719 and continued until her last birthday, her 46th birthday, in 1727. There were a couple of years that Swift missed there, or we believe that he missed those years. If he didn't, those poems have not survived. So the poems that we have belong to the middle period of Swift's writing career, his most celebrated period, and he was writing his great prose satires in the 1720s, A Modest Proposal and Gulliver's Travels being the best known, of course. The last group of poems, The Lady's Dressing Room, A Beautiful Young Nymph Going to Bed, and Strephon and Chloe, these were all later works, all published between 1732 and 34, right before Swift's decline in the late 1730s. And these poems reveal the fullness of Swift's misanthropy. As he had done in his early town eclogues, he alludes to the Latin pastoral tradition here. He gives, for example, the different women pastoral names, Chloe, Corinna, Celia, and so forth. But he fills these verses with grotesque scatological imagery. Scatological imagery is images of human waste and bodily functions, and Swift was the master of it. Famous for it, in fact. Gulliver's Travels is full of scatological imagery, too. I think of Gulliver pissing on the palace of the Lilliputians to put out a fire, for example. So some questions to think about for class discussion. So Swift's attitude towards women in the poems of the early 1730s is self-evident and drew the ire of female peers like Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, as we've seen. But what is his attitude towards the two men, both of whom are named Strephon? We're talking about different Strephons here, but it's easy to overlook the two men and what his attitude is towards the men who love these women. How is Corinna's situation in A Beautiful Young Nymph Going to Bed different from that of Celia and Chloe? And what's the significance of that? Finally, Swift's Stella poems are addressed to a woman about whom he cared quite deeply. In what ways is his treatment of her in these poems consistent with, or divergent from, or perhaps both, his attitude toward women in the late satires? And that concludes this video on Jonathan Swift.